All right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Ronald, if you can do me a favor and keep watching the participant entry. Yeah, perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to EBHO's Advocacy, Affordable Housing Advocacy 101 webinar series. We're really glad to have you here. My name is Dolores Tejada. I'm the lead organizer at EBHO, and we wanted to do this webinar series for a lot of different reasons. So each year we have a leadership academy, which is comprised of resident members, community members, affordable housing staff, who want to learn more about their leadership skills, learn how to participate in affordable housing advocacy, and we were, of course, unable to do that this year in the traditional way. So we decided to condense it into a 4-part series, specifically for the leadership class. But we decided that the topics we're going to cover are really foundational and might be good for our broader membership to just refresh themselves on. So we decided to open it up to everyone. So this group is really a mix of people who have been members for years, people who are new members, and then the Leadership Academy class. So the range of understanding and the range of knowledge in this room is very broad and exciting. That also means, though, that for the Leadership Academy, there is some targeted discussion pieces. For example, homework that we are going to assign because the Leadership Academy has the opportunity to participate in this in a more in-depth way. And so with that, I want us to get started. I want to talk about a little bit of the features for Zoom. So you can mute and unmute yourself if you're using a computer by clicking on the participant list. You can see the icons there. Or actually you'll see it in the bottom left-hand corner as well to mute and unmute yourself. I'm going to mute everyone for the most part during the presentation, but if you click on the participant list, you also have the option to raise your hand. And while we won't be answering questions during the webinar or during that Ronald's presentation, you can put your questions in the chat box, which is another cool feature that I want us to utilize a lot tonight or this afternoon. You can use the chat feature to enter in questions, concerns, comments, and use that as a way to interact with each other. And to start, I want us to use that chat box in a second to introduce ourselves. And again, I want to talk about the information that we're sharing today is really we're talking about affordable housing, kind of the foundational pieces of it, where affordable housing is today, how affordable housing works. And then future series, we're going to talk more in depth about the history of affordable housing, how we got to where we are. And then there'll also be discussions and tie-ins about how that connects to our advocacy work and what we're doing in each of these sessions. To start, I do want to go over some community agreements. These community agreements are agreements that we use in our staff meeting and that we are trying to integrate more into the spaces that EBHO holds. And there's 4 of them. So I will copy and paste them into the chat box and also share them with you all right now. So the first one is, this space is what you make of it and what we make of it. And feel free to comment about what that means to you, or what that sounds like that means to you. And really it's about everyone participating and bringing themselves into this space. That's my interpretation of it. The second one is individual needs are community needs, which is that we are here as like a collective. We are here to think of ourselves in terms of a community, and while we each have individual needs, and we should have our needs met, like housing is a human right, we should also think about that in terms of community, and taking care of yourself also means taking care of the community. So the third one is we seek an equitable balance of perspectives, which means that we know that there is a range of skill sets, a range of knowledge, and we want to hear from everybody. So that could mean that you share your perspective and then you take a step back to hear from other folks. So it's kind of on par with the make space, take space ideology. And then we want to hear from folks, and we respect each other's difference of opinions. And we speak in I statements. So those are some of the tie-ins with we seek an equitable balance of perspective. And then lastly, we value curiosity over criticism. That means that we want to come into this space wanting to hear from folks and wanting to know that we are in community together, and that we want to ask why questions instead of assuming what somebody needs or means and where they're coming from. We should ask those why questions and really challenge each other in a curious way. So with that, the next thing that I would like us to do is to take a minute or two and use this chat box feature to introduce ourselves. Lori's already ahead of the game. In the chat box feature, I would love for folks to type, if you're able to, your name, what pronouns you use, where you are. So where in the East Bay you may be, who you're here representing. Are you here because you work at an affordable housing development? Are you here because you work with a partner organization? Are you here because you're a community member doing work in your community? All of those things. And then lastly, one thing you hope to gain from today. So let's take a minute so we can, those of us who are able can type in what our thoughts are.
I'm unable to use Zoom.
Hi, why don't you go ahead and take
I'm on the phone. Yeah, I have you pulled up on the computer, but it won't let me access the latest version in my browser.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's telling me I have to download a new version of Chrome or Firefox or Chromium Edge. So I'm on the phone.
Okay. Is that you, Ann? It sounds like Ann.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
It's Ann.
Cool. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and just participate by phone? That's totally fine.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I see a lot of folks responding. We have folks here. We have Grover, who's EBHO's communications manager. Irma is with Hope Solutions. Hi, Irma. Andy Nolan is with Habitat for Humanity in Silicon Valley. Tanya representing CHDC in Richmond. Kim, Bill from who's here because he's an EBHO member. William Goodwin out in Pittsburgh. Lots and lots of folks. Thank you, everybody. And we're gonna get started now. So to start, I'm going to introduce today's speaker. The way that this is going to work is each week we'll have a different guest speaker who's really going to lead the discussion. Part of the brilliance of EBHO is that because of our broad membership, we have access to a lot of different people with a lot of different expertise. And so our Leadership Academy always tries to find the folks who are best to present on that topic, and then EBHO brings in our own knowledge and skill set as well. So today we have Ronald. Ronald is an organizer of Vietnamese descent who, when he worked with EBHO, campaigned across the East Bay for local tenant protections, deeply affordable homes, and land use policies to promote development without displacement. He follows a transformative organizing practice that emphasizes relationship building across difference and leadership development of those most impacted by structural violence. He believes housing is a human right and that an abundant world that meets our human needs is within our grasp. So thank you, Ronald, and take it away.
Oh, yeah. And I guess thanks to Dolores for throwing this together and moving forward with Leadership Academy this year with so much uncertainty. I think, just to say real quick, it's always been just such a special and personally important slice of EBHO's work for me. And yeah, just it's a total pleasure, honor to be able to support Leadership Academy this summer. And I think especially excited that we have this cool mix and that, you know, because we're doing it as a webinar, able to open it up to so many people from the broad EBHO membership. And I think for those who are part of this year's Leadership Academy class, it's also a really good chance to kind of get a feel for this network, right? And this big coalition that we've assembled here, that EBHO actually is. So I'm gonna try to jump into a Affordable Housing 101 presentation. I expect it to take about 40 minutes to get through. And I think for those that have participated in other webinars, I'll share. For me personally, I always appreciate a chance to you know, share my own perspective, right, and to get involved and you know, talk to other people. And so the design of this is not going to be me talking at you for the next 2 hours. We hope to give you this really critical info. We'll pause a little bit along the way for people to interact into it. Like Dolores said in the beginning, really encourage everybody, if there's a clarifying question or a thought that comes up, to record that in the chat. And then after we're through, we'll circle back to that, those questions and open it up into more of a large group discussion where we can all kind of help each other harvest or take away those really key insights. And I think it's with the idea that I myself can't give that all the insight. I think it's the strength of organizing in this way that we bring people together with all the different perspectives, so that in sharing our own perspectives, we all walk away with a much better sense of the full picture. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into this webinar in just a moment. Affordable Housing 101. And it's a little bit of like a greatest hits, actually, of EBHO's work. You can see here on the bottom, this statement that housing is a human right. Maybe just as a kind of first step, if that's a statement you believe in, if you believe that housing is a human right, as I do, could you just acknowledge that by putting a little thumbs up into, you can use your react buttons on your Zoom control panel. And you can also just give us a visual thumbs up. And I'm gonna, move forward with the idea that people are agreeing with this statement that housing is a human right. And I think just to say that that's a really important common thread between us. So this presentation is going to cover, in the first place, what EBHO is. We're going to give you some definitions about you know, what we're talking about when we talk about affordable housing. Zoom in a little bit on the crisis itself, the housing crisis, and its growing unmet needs that we see, and then give you a lot more, I guess, technical, important information to do with the different solutions, right? So what types of housing do we uplift as a way of trying to solve the crisis? And then what's the role of local government and other actors in this space to plan and regulate and finance affordable housing? How does that build into, you know, our advocacy and organizing work to build a unified movement for housing justice that's based in the solutions to protect and preserve and produce affordable housing? We'll end just by talking a little bit about this really important moment we're in, and how does all this information in the past of our work, you know, how does that kind of set us up for meeting the future? And that's also going to foreshadow, I hope, really well into our session next month in July, when we'll focus much more, as Dolores had said, on the history of segregation in the Bay Area. So, who are we, right? what is EBHO? And I think just to offer here at the start, oopsie, this mission statement. So EBHO, for everybody participating, that's East Bay Housing Organizations with an S. If there's one acronym you take away from today, we hope you definitely know what does EBHO stand for. We are a member-driven organization working to protect and preserve and create affordable housing opportunities for low-income communities in the East Bay. And we do that by advocating and organizing and educating and building coalitions. So EBHO itself is a coalition of all the member organizations, creators of affordable housing, and folks saw, as people were introducing themselves, just the kind of broad network. And the idea is we need to assemble all stakeholders because this is something that takes everybody working together. So this crisis that we're in, and it is an ever expanding crisis, right? I think we try to characterize the crisis in these ways, but I wanted to offer too that we all feel ourselves, right, that we're in a crisis, and it's not something that has to be defined, you know, in this way. I think just knowing our own experiences of housing insecurity, the housing insecurity of our loved ones, it is something that we feel intimately. But all that said, it's still, I think we try to characterize it in these ways by saying we have a crisis because rental affordability is getting much worse. We clearly have a crisis that's visible, that we can see because of the growing numbers of unhoused people. One of the key features of gentrification displacement is this kind of economic imbalance between the creation of jobs and the creation of housing, which is very true of what we've seen in the Bay Area. A lot more jobs being created than housing to house those new folks. Homeownership, maybe this resonates for you, just so wildly out of reach. And I think about that a lot myself personally, just feels like the most hopeless dream. And I think we associate these problems with kind of a scarcity in funding, right? And the systematic cuts to federal and state funding, and a really serious feature, the loss of local redevelopment funding, which happened in 2012 and led to a loss of over $1 billion annually in really critical resources that would have helped us create more affordable housing. So that idea that, you know, we all feel the crisis. We of course had a crisis prior to COVID-19, but I think with all of that said, I think we do want to move forward from this slide with the idea that we actually have solutions. We can solve the crisis. We're not powerless by no means, and it really is the work that we're doing amongst ourselves that will and can end this crisis. So let's not be too down on ourselves. What are we talking about when we talk about affordable housing? This is a really important question. And I think it's a very contested term, affordable. It can mean a lot of things. And I've already had really great conversations with some of you about exactly that word, affordable, and what are we talking about. I think the idea is that it's a true affordability depends on a person's income level, but that it should be 1/3 or approximately 30% of a person's gross income, including their utility costs. So when we talk about creating affordable housing for low-income communities, we mean these are folks who are paying 1/3 of their income. We want true affordability for those who need it most. That's our mission. Some of the key attributes of affordable housing. What does it actually mean? Like, what is the actual thing that's created? And one of the things that makes it such a transformative and important social and public good is that it's affordable to people of all income levels. It's not just affordable because you make so much money that you're able to. These homes are maintained, right? So they're not to fall into disrepair, not to fall into really poor living conditions. So they're safe and healthy. People have what they need to live in dignified housing. A key feature is that it's accessible and available to all, and it's based on human rights principles of universality and equity, and the idea that if housing is a human right, that means that we cannot discriminate against people, for example, who have Section 8 vouchers. And that's a very big difference between what we see on the open market. And there's an increased security of tenure, which means you're less likely to be evicted for an unjust reason. And so these are other pieces of what affordable housing means to us. This is almost a silly slide, benefits of affordable housing. Why do we have to talk about this? Of course, with an audience like this, everybody knows and feels certain about the benefits of affordable housing. I can't tell you though, and Lori and William and others in Contra Costa County, I think maybe this will resonate more with you. We do have many jurisdictions that don't understand the broad social benefits of affordable housing. So just as when we create schools and hospitals, it's a community institution that has broad benefits, not just for the individuals who live there, but for everybody in the community. And so it is important to name the broad benefits of affordable housing. Some of these features that you see here, that it provides that stability and a foundation, right, for stability and dignity and success for children and families. I often talk about residents themselves and just the enormous importance of having these folks in your community because they get involved, they promote civic engagement, right? They want to improve their neighborhoods, they add diversity to the neighborhood. And so that's just a little bit about how we try to talk about affordable housing with those that aren't on our side. Okay. So this is really tied to, so I'm going to go back, this question of what is affordable, right? And we say it's 1/3 of your income. There's there's another really important way to categorize this in terms of area median income, or AMI. It's another important acronym that we hope people can become familiar with. As we said in the beginning, our mission is to create affordable housing opportunities for low income, low, very low, extremely low, folks at no income. It is not EBHO's explicit mission to create moderate income housing, although it is also a big piece of the pie. I think for me personally, I'm always upset when I see an affordable housing project that's 120% AMI and wishing that it was more attuned to the need. And this is the system we use, or not we, but the field uses to identify different needs. It can also be kind of shown this way in a graph. And so if you're a person who is at extremely low income, for one person, that's the red bar. That means as of 2017, you were making about $22,000 per year. So that's for somebody who has extremely low income. You can see low income is at about $58,000 a year. This graph doesn't project it out, but if you think then of this piece of 120% AMI, that means oftentimes affordable housing can be built for people who are making even above six-figure salaries. So just naming that's a part of our fight. We have contested terms, and really it is our mission to continue to align affordable housing opportunities to low-income communities. And it's a part of our ongoing work and struggle. Oh, sorry. So I've been a little ahead of myself. So I asked folks in the beginning if you could please put a thumbs up if you believe housing is a human right. And I just wanted to pause again for a moment to see if folks could acknowledge, do you feel that the human right to housing is currently protected? And I wonder if we might get a volunteer to type their answer into the chat, or somebody maybe could quickly unmute themselves and offer an answer to that question. So we asked, do you feel housing is a human right? The next question is, do you feel that that right is protected? I'm looking at the chat. Or trying to, sorry. I'm sharing my screen, so I can't really bother with the chat. One moment. I'm seeing there Katie, Azul, everybody. Okay, yeah, it's not a trick answer. Okay, cool. Sorry, it's not a trick question, and I'm seeing the answers. No, it's not protected. And so moving forward here, aces, y'all, y'all are following me. It's about the need for affordable housing. It's about the need, and I think we can't say that the human right to housing is protected when we have this enormous unmet need. So there is not enough affordable housing, we all know it. We can talk about it in this way. We try to quantify it, and we put a lot of work into quantifying it through housing elements and other planning documents, and showing the enormous shortfall of affordable homes. In Alameda County, 60,000, or rather a shortfall of 60,000 homes for extremely low and very low income. Huge shortage of homes all across the Bay Area, and a lack of political will to create those homes. And in 2017, we had over 5,500 unhoused folks that were accounted for in the Alameda County homeless counts. I wanted to pull up, sorry, just this slide here. I hope people can see. This is data from 2019's homeless count. You can see here, sorry, just for the city of Oakland, we had in 2019 an increase. You can see at the top, 4,000 in the city of Oakland alone, so this is a growing problem. And we're going to be sharing this information out with folks. I would really encourage you to get acquainted with these figures. I just wanted to point here too that only 2% of unhoused folks who took this survey responded that they weren't interested in a home. And so just trying to quantify a little bit, really the issue that I think most proves that housing is not currently a human right, the issue that most breaks our heart, that's a growing issue of our unhoused people, our unhoused neighbors. Okay, so moving forward, wanting to talk a little bit about the different approaches and solutions we have. So I think looking at the problem, now let's pivot to the solutions. And it is an overview of how market and other non-market approaches to affordable housing kind of come together. Starting with the idea of market rate housing, and I'll share, I'm not a huge champion or fan, and I'm not somebody who battles for the creation of more market rate housing. But it is the majority of the housing that we have, and it figures a lot into how we try to achieve our mission. Because there's some naturally, or some people disagree with this term, but there's affordable housing on the market where folks maybe have, because of rental protections, lower rents. And so it's about preserving that housing that exists. Some of the problems with market rate housing is that they don't offer those same protections. They often will fall into disrepair. And I mean, these are broad statements, but they're more likely to fall into disrepair than an affordable housing property. And then there is, and people will maybe be familiar with the supply and demand argument. I've characterized that before as trickle down housing, or the idea that if we were just to create more market rate housing, then we would have, prices would go down, right? Everybody would benefit. I think if you're familiar with trickle down economics, it's a kind of a solution that I think works best for those that are least hurt by the housing crisis. So that's a little bit about market rate. We'll talk more about the other
Which is to say that it doesn't work.
Thank you, Dolores. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And if you followed the Moms for Housing fight, you'll know that they launched a lot of really important new understandings and critiques of market rate housing. So regulating market rate housing, then, like I alluded to, is a big part of how we achieve our mission. We try to create very strong rent protections. It's a combination of what we refer to as rent stabilization, or caps on rent increases, combined with just cause protections for evictions. So it kind of creates, those two things together form true protections for tenants. The idea is that without rent stabilization, you may be evicted because of a rent hike. And without just cause, you could be evicted for any old reason. And so you need both of those things together for tenants to be truly protected. We also seek to regulate kind of some of the worst symptoms of the market in terms of the house flippers, or the folks who are really in it to maximize their profits, by regulating condo conversion, and trying to preserve as best we can single room occupancy. Sorry, and then I apologize that these are written as acronyms. SRO stands for single room occupancy. And then STRs, or short-term rentals, will be referred to like an Airbnb type of situation. So we try to regulate all of those things so that Airbnbs aren't taking all the rental housing off the market. Condos aren't taking all the rental housing off the market, right? We try to limit the demolition of that naturally occurring affordable housing, and instead try to create programs where our members can acquire and preserve that housing. And then even if we can't do any of those things, because really there's a lot against us in seeking justice in these forms, at least having relocation benefits, so that if you're evicted or if you're displaced because of the actions of your landlord, you at least have funds enough to be able to rehouse yourself. So that's a little bit of how we try to push back at the market itself. Rent subsidies. These are important programs that are basically tools in our toolbox for how we try to create affordability on the market. I included this slide just because it's really important, I think, to where we're at right now when it comes to mediation of rent forgiveness and the temporary assistance. I think it's probably the hottest form of advocacy happening right now because of so many tenants being unable to pay their rents, and the kind of mutual hurt that takes place because of that, and the need to create really strong, or to find the funds and the resources to make sure that renters are getting some help. So rent forgiveness is a really important piece of that. And then we also have these kind of longer term tools, things like Section 8 housing vouchers. We are always trying to make those more effective. trying to limit, right, the discrimination that takes place on the market, and then tenant and project-based assistance. And there's other programs too. I don't know, we just put other programs here, but there's probably a lot more that we're not talking about. Cool. Moving forward to public housing, which is the oldest form of affordable housing. I think of it a little bit as, you know, like public schools, charter schools. I think we've seen a kind of wave of privatization in America in general that says all the public entities, you know, should seek to create public and private partnerships. I think it's debatable whether or not that's led to, whether that's been a great thing for affordable housing, but there is a tradition of public housing that's owned and managed by the local public housing authority. Think of it as municipal housing. I actually really love the idea of it because I think of especially affordable housing as a public good, right? It's a social and public good. For it to be regulated by a public authority would make sense. And I think it's to do with kind of systematic destruction of our public entities and institutions that makes public housing less viable in these days. So you don't see much of this. Instead, you see this other important thing, subsidized rental housing, which is privately owned by mission-driven nonprofits. And I guess for-profits, I don't know many for-profits that do subsidized rental housing, but maybe you all are more familiar with that. But I think these are the land trusts, right? These are the nonprofit affordable housing developers who get assistance, right? That public-private assistance from federal and state and local government so that we can kind of do the impossible and create affordability against the context of this incredibly unaffordable housing market. So it's those subsidies that make it possible. And some apartments qualify for much deeper subsidies that allow us to create housing for extremely low income people. Another very important feature of subsidized rental housing is that it's usually accompanied by social services. And so we have then really what we need to be able to bring folks back into stability, not just four walls in a living room and a roof, but that connection to case management so that they're getting the deeper support, the human support that they need. And of course, the home is what makes it possible. And so this is a kind of rental housing that is probably the majority of what we see. I think, yeah, the majority of what we see. And permanently affordable, right? Or long-term affordable. So we're thinking then of how important that is for the future of communities, right? And not just for the people living there now. I'm seeing the chat kind of blow up, so I'm going to take a moment just to look at the chat in case there's an important thought or question there. Oh, sorry. Never mind, I'm not going to. I can't figure out how. But thank you for recording questions in the chat. Like I said, this is gonna wrap pretty soon, and then we're gonna open it up to a more full discussion with all of you. So these are all connected to the solutions that we see to homelessness and our house crisis. The eviction protections, right? So that folks aren't becoming unhoused in the first place. And the rent subsidies too, right? That allow folks to, you know, hold on to their homes. There's transitional and temporary solutions, you know, varying success rates. I think we would like to have, and actually I think are seeing in this moment, more innovative temporary solutions that we hope to become, could become the source of more adequate permanent solutions. I'm thinking of some of Governor Newsom's executive actions that he's taken during these last months of sheltering in place. But EBHO, we have a strong stance, or I don't know how strong or how firm we are as it's not the only thing that we say about homelessness, but it is important to say that the ultimate solution to ending a person's homelessness is to give them a permanent supportive housing, right? And so homelessness ends with a home. And if we don't have those homes lined up, then we're really not setting ourselves up to create true housing justice for unhoused people. EBHO in the past has run very powerful public land for public good campaigns, where we've called for public lands to be used as shelter for the unhoused. We think if we have parcels of land owned by the city that they're not developing or doing anything with, why can't that be a harbor or a shelter or a safe place? In general, we don't get very far with cities on that because homelessness continues to be criminalized. And so I think that's another, in the background to all of this, really key piece of our future work to decriminalize homelessness. And we are working actively on that right now. I say we, I mean my dear colleagues. And homeownership programs. This is the last piece of this kind of overview of the different housing types and the solutions. And I guess I wanted to include this just to name that there are federal home mortgage assistance programs that help first-time home buyers or can help first-time home buyers. You know, in the past, it's been one of the most racist federal programs, but it continues to be a thing that allows these days people of all kinds to purchase their first home. You see a lot of people use those to buy a stake in a tenancy in common or a condo or something like that. And then community land trusts, of course, create an alternative way for folks to attain something like home ownership. It's less of that classic understanding of a single family home, but usually then having an ownership stake along with other residents of your building. And I think about too the Habitat for Humanity model, which does create homeownership opportunities by engaging residents themselves in the actual building and creation of their home. So these are all together, we love all of it, right? And I think what we say is, because the crisis is complex, it was created over decades, the solutions that we seek are also complex. And there's no solution that we'll turn our nose up at. I think the idea is we want to assemble all of them together into kind of a broad platform and build power enough around that platform so that we can actually get these things implemented and institutionalized. And so another interactive moment, I'm gonna stop the share so I can look at the chat. I've asked you, do you think housing is a human right? Everybody said yes. I asked, do you think it's protected? Everyone said no. Next question is, whose job is it to protect our human right to housing? If you could put your answers in the chat, or Anne, if you're really excited to answer that, you want to unmute yourself, you could go ahead. Seeing great responses already. Ooh, well, okay. Is it that one person puts the answer that everyone, it just resonates and that everybody puts the same thing? Everybody has said everyone as the answer. I like Ali's answer, naming explicitly the government, right? Katie, I like that too. May, talking about community members and elected officials. Yeah. I think, again, these aren't trick questions, but this one is, I think, a little less straightforward. Let's jump back into the presentation here. Whose job is it? I agree, it's everyone's job. A lot of people will name local government or government generally, the federal government, the state government, local government. I think if you legislate, if you are elected to lead, because, right, we have this belief that folks are leading, right, with community in mind and the needs of their constituents in mind, that it should and ought to be the role of government to protect our human rights. I think just because of the knowledge in this space, everybody has kind of skipped past that, knowing that local government often does not, and almost never does, protect our human rights. Then whose job is it? I agree with the answers in the chat. It's everyone's job. And we are all kind of working together, right, to advance these human rights. But we work especially to hold government accountable. And I think I've got away from the chat. I'm sure there's a lot more beautiful thoughts there. And I encourage you all to keep typing in the chat too. So we're going to conclude this webinar just by looking a little bit about the role of local government to finance and plan and regulate housing, and then looking then at our role then to hold them accountable, and how do we do that by our own movement building and organizing work. So what does government do? They do all this planning and land use stuff. I'll say I never got into the housing justice space because of my love for general plans or housing elements or you know, any of this stuff. But it is really relevant to how we achieve our mission, and these are all important sites of where we can test. And a lot of that post work, if you've been engaged or if you will continue to engage with us, we try to engage our members as much as we can in these planning processes. And so some of the data I showed you earlier about the percentages of extremely low and low income that we need, those come from, sorry, the regional housing needs allocation, and interact really closely with the local housing element for a city. And so it's actually pretty connected to the Fair Housing Act from 1968, when we passed a new law through a lot of organizing, actually a lot of organizing in the Bay Area that led to that, back with folks like C.L. Dellums and the East Bay Democratic Club. It was a real fight back in the day. And I think we work with fair housing these days, and this idea that we need to affirmatively further fair housing by taking proactive actions based on a race and equity analysis. And so though we've had these things for a long time, things like fair housing planning, it's never been, there's not much teeth, right, to these requirements. We can tell a city, this is the need that you have, but it's tough to hold feet to the fire and actually get them to allocate resources in order to meet the need. We also work with land use policies and attempt as best we can to create just land use through zoning amendments, and trying to create the ability for there to be dense multifamily rental housing near transit. That's a big piece of how we try to meet the need for affordable housing. Of course, right, we go right up against the NIMBYs, right up against the suburbs that do not and have never wanted to zone in that way that would actually meet the needs. And we also work with this idea of inclusionary requirements. Inclusionary just means it's the option then for a developer to create on-site an affordable unit. So if a developer is creating market rate housing, they'll have an inclusionary requirement that says at least a certain percentage of their units have to be affordable. None of these things work as they're supposed to, and there's a lot of work on our end as advocates and people who believe in the importance of this work to make sure that inclusionary requirements, zoning amendments, fair housing requirements, and the regional need that cities are listening to those things and actually building affordable and creating affordable housing in accordance with that. And like I said, you don't have to be an expert in these things, but we do see these as important pieces of how we achieve our work. The cities are also responsible for regulating. So everything that we talked about in terms of rent stabilization, trying to limit Airbnbs, trying to limit trying to preserve single room occupancy, trying to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. All of that happens through ordinances, local ordinances. And I mean, whatever, sometimes it's at the county level, sometimes we go to the state level, but these are all ways that we try to hold government accountable through regulation, trying to pass new laws. And finally, financing is a huge, huge piece. And I know that there are folks on this call who could speak probably much longer and more thoroughly and better to the importance of equitable financing. But the idea is, because we're trying to create housing in this market, we need a lot of funds and we need a lot of resources. And I think not to be scared of, the high price tag. Instead, to say, we know we live in a world of abundance and in a state of abundance, and that we have money enough. It's just that we don't have that political will or the allies or that understanding and the allies in power to actually allocate those funds. And we seek funds in all different ways. We run local and county level bonds. People maybe, I'm sure everybody is familiar with Measure Measure A1 and Measure KK, or if you work in Berkeley, Measures OMP. How vital are those, right, for us to achieve our work versus, where does it come from and how do we get them? And the idea is EBHO does a lot of work to create, those bond campaigns. We also spend a lot of time, especially in the city of Oakland, trying to get them to assess impact fees. If a market rate developer is going to build and reap tons of profit off of a luxury apartment complex in downtown Oakland, they should be paying a big fee, and that fee goes into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to offset the higher rents of their luxury housing and make it possible for us to create affordable housing. And so those impact fees have been a key focus for us. And I'm seeing somebody's raised their hand. I'm seeing the chat completely blowing up. You know what? Dolores, I wonder, can you give me a little heads up here? Are you checking out the chat?
Yes, lots of great opinions being shared.
Cool.
Asul talked about the housing choice voucher. It is very inaccessible and has lender restrictions, which can make it difficult for low income people. And Williams updated us that yesterday the ABAG announced that the RENA as 400,000 housing units should be 1.5 million minimum. So he's talking about government agencies or committees underestimating how much housing is needed. And yeah.
Cool. Yeah, if you could just be my eyes on the chat, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm sure there's so much beautiful thoughts and ideas there. And yeah, we're getting into this kind of wonky, weedy place, and I mean, financing is such an important piece. I was just going to name here boomerang funds. We talk about boomerang. Those are former redevelopment funds. When I talked earlier about when we lost redevelopment agencies, we lost over $1 billion annually. We lost it because it didn't go to affordable housing anymore. And those funds were dispersed in all different places. We tried to get them to boomerang some of that money back to affordable housing. We've had ups and downs with that. Real estate transfer taxes, y'all. That is, I know it sounds wonky or it sounds maybe awful, but they're some of the most radical solutions I think we have. The idea is we're taxing at the point of buying and selling property. So especially those that are exchanging property in order to maximize their own profit, the idea is that we discourage a little bit those kind of predatory profit-making practices in our local real estate by assessing a transfer tax. It doesn't make it illegal to buy and sell or try to make money, but it does take some of the profit and put it towards the creation of affordable housing. Real estate transfer taxes are how we fund measures, I think Measure O in Berkeley. And business taxes on rental housing, I can't speak to that. But local financing, hugely important. Regulation, planning, land use, financing. We have to fight our leaders to actually take this stuff seriously. But we can do it when we come together. So finishing up here, talking a little bit about this moment that we're in, trying to create a unified movement for housing justice. And if you've followed this adventure through EBHO's work, we've talked a lot about different solutions. We've talked about protecting residents where they are in their rental units. We've talked about preserving existing affordable housing, the single room occupancy, those buildings that would otherwise be demolished. And we've talked about what it takes to produce or create new affordable housing. And so I think all the different solutions we've talked about fall into one of those buckets. And, I imagine everybody or people are at different levels of familiarity with the idea of the 3 Ps, but these are the 3 Ps: protect, preserve, produce. You could put them in another order if you'd like. EBHO, in our mission statement, we use the word create instead of produce because we don't think of housing as a product. We think of it as, right, a human right. But if you imagine it as those different buckets, it takes, that platform, all of us trying to push all of these solutions forward. And that's what I meant earlier when I said, yes, we have a crisis, but we also have a lot of know-how, and we have solutions on the table. Some of the policy solutions that we've been working on right now are, these equitable financing pieces. You've probably heard a lot of calls to defund the police. I know the new Oakland budget only just got passed. I think overall we are not happy with how that budget was passed. Yeah, we could probably do a whole separate webinar just on that one piece. Actually, we're going to in July. We're going to focus back on this in July, talking about, I won't go that far ahead of us, but just that this is a really major battle, right? And the idea is that we can unlock, right, our public dollars, especially from the discretionary fund, and we can put that towards affordable housing. We're also, right, seeking these emergency renter protections, these emergency rent relief programs, rental assistance and forgiveness. EBHO only, I think, maybe just yesterday, released their 2020 state legislative priorities. Hopefully everybody on this call is signed up to our newsletter and got to see that. Those are some really exciting new laws that we want to get passed this year. Constitutional amendments that would create, right, an explicit right to housing in the state of California. Some really exciting new legislative stuff. There's, I think, 5 priority bills. And the public land law, always trying to, right, use public land for public good much better than we do. And then ongoing preservation fights, new research that we've done on Airbnbs. Airbnb is getting worse all the time in the city of Oakland. You may have been following or have heard some of the local Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. Sorry, that's what this last acronym stands for, TOPA. Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It has been one of our other fights, really connected to Moms for Housing. So some of the local battles, and then, I've got it here too, just in that same kind of box of, it's about rent control and tenant protections, it's about housing preservation, it's about equitable funding, it's about public land for public good. That's, I guess, is the overview of where we're at in terms of the movement we're trying to build, the solutions we're fighting for, how we do it. And so hoping this is a useful overview of not just right the problem, not just the different kinds of affordable housing that exist, not just what we mean when we're talking about affordable housing, but also the actual ongoing work of EBHO and all of our partners and all of our members to come together and advance the 3 Ps and these solutions that, again, when we think about whose job is it, it is the job of local government to do this. They've really never been on our side. And I think we are in a moment of real opportunity and upheaval. Things are always changing, but I think we do feel optimistic about the kind of the universal need for affordable housing and our really good chance to change how things have been and actually create real housing justice in the East Bay. And just that last thought on upheaval and opportunity, that it's about movement building, it's about creating resiliency in and amongst ourselves and building deep community with each other. It's about our shared belief that housing is a human right. And when it comes to the protests that we're so inspired by that we're seeing right now, we understand the intimate links, between the structural violence of the prison industrial complex and the carceral system and our work to create real housing justice. We see those links, in encampments where we have, police and public dollars going towards policing of unhoused people instead of going towards the creation of homes for them. It's a very clear link. And then just structurally, that these are the housing system, like the carceral system, is a system built on, oppression of Black and brown and all marginalized people. And so I think we want to be connected into that moment. We want to feel in deep solidarity with, this broader thing taking place these days to create social and racial and economic justice and to institutionalize anti-racism and to really change how things happen. So that's what we're going to dig into in these next sessions, in these next webinars, talking much more about this ongoing fight. Some of these next steps include a learning lab happening for Leadership Academy participants. I'm sorry, this one is, this webinar today is open to all members, but we have a class of our 2020 Leadership Academy class that we're looking forward to going deeper with them in this learning lab session. We'll also come back with all of you in the July webinar, and then some homework to write up your own stories. And I think we want to work with the empathy muscle and the empathy tool and use our stories to connect with each other and build power with each other. So a little bit foreshadowing what's coming up next. But that's the end of my webinar. As advertised, did not take 2 hours. I'm not a big fan of a 2-hour webinar.
All right.
But yeah, Dolores, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to take it away. Thank you so much, Ronald, for that very quick overview of affordable housing and how it kind of ties into this current moment. Again, it's just a taste. We're going to talk more in depth in future webinars. And we have some questions in the chat box. So let me just scroll up to it. I apologize. Okay, so one of the questions was preserving, protecting, and building new. What about unused housing, e.g. Abandoned existing structures or brand new non-affordable empty units? Big problem in Oakland. Yeah, those are two very different types of housing right now that are getting unused. So with abandoned existing structures, it depends whether it's private or publicly owned, right? There is a lot of, and Ronald talked about this a little bit, there's a lot of public land, a lot of city-owned land that is basically the people's land that includes some of those buildings. So it's about pushing the city to prioritize the people's land for the people. And that looks like making sure that the public land stays public and that we are able to build affordable housing. So that looks like advocating for any new public land should have affordable housing on it. With these newer, more non-affordable empty units, for the past couple years, any new construction has had to either include affordable housing or pay a fee. Oftentimes, the developer chooses to pay the fee instead of including affordable housing in their building. So when they pay that fee is theoretically supposed to go to a pot of funding that will then be designated for developers to apply for and to develop more affordable housing. Just this past winter and fall, we had a campaign because that pot of money wasn't being tracked. We were asking for reports on how much money has been paid in, where that money is, and the city was like, we don't know. So we are still in the process of holding them accountable about how much money that there actually was and where that money is sitting now, because we are in desperate need of funding affordable housing. So that and what happens on the private market is like really hard for us. It's hard for us to advocate for people who have private non-affordable units to make them affordable, right? And our hope is that with community push and with specifically towards government agencies, that we can have funding to build affordable housing, and to be able to match the fact that all these affordable units are being built, or non-affordable units are being built, and affordable units are lagging behind and not able to keep up with the demand in the same way that private units are. Yes, Katie, there was a lot of media attention that it received. We can certainly send out some of the articles. I will actually make a note of that so that we can have it as part of our future discussions. Those fees were called the impact fees. And there was a lot of media coverage. We have a great communications manager, Grover, who was tweeting about it and also making sure that the media knew and was aware of it. And so I will make sure to compile those articles so y'all can read about what happened, because it was a lot of interesting stuff. You know, our estimates said that there should be like $50 million in that pot of money over the past couple years, and the city of Oakland was like, maybe there's 7 million. So there was a huge gap in understanding of the math there, and no real way of knowing what was going on. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to. Are y'all seeing me on your screens as I'm talking? Yes, okay, because I see Ronald on my screen. So I'm like, wait, why, if I'm talking, why wouldn't I be on my own screen? Okay, so I want to go back to this chat. Yes, a lot of interest in learning more about that. And it's still an ongoing campaign that we're working on. So we definitely plan on covering it, and definitely plan on continuing to ask the city like what's going on there. And it'll be a great opportunity for those of you who are interested in advocating with us to join that campaign as well. Okay, are there any other questions around what Ronald was presenting? I see two other comments. So Strive Wealth Builder says, we have a movement called the Housing Crisis Attack, which is working to bridge the gap between developers and investors and affordable housing groups to place more than 500 low-income households into affordable housing within the next 2 years. That sounds like great work. And John says, any hope for the federal government being a better partner for homelessness and affordable housing in the future? What is one thing it could do besides funding that would help the most? Oh, those are two very big questions. So the federal government, as you alluded to, gives funding to local agencies to be able to provide affordable housing. So it's really about us advocating to our local agencies about how they're distributing and using that money. There's a lot of federal amazing campaigns that are, or there's a lot of campaigns that could have an impact if they were federal laws, federal amendments to who could be eligible for affordable housing. I'm thinking specifically connecting back to people who are to the carceral state, which is that, you know, it would be great if the federal government provided housing or provided opportunities for people who are exiting the prison system to be able to find stable and affordable housing. There is opportunities for the federal government to be able to, and just by and large, investing more in things like Section 8 vouchers, which as of like what, 2017, there's been like no new distributions of Section 8 or HUD vouchers for a while. Yeah, so we have another question here that says, can anyone point me towards reading on the disbanding of redevelopment agencies? I moved to California 2 years after the agencies went away, and I want to know more about what they did and how big of an impact their absence makes. Yeah, we can look up those articles as well, absolutely. Love the idea of sending more readings to all of you. And yeah, I want to pose that question around what the federal government can do. What do you all think out there are some ideas or some responsibilities of the federal government to provide affordable housing and to make a reality that housing is a human right?
Flipping it to you all.
Yeah, so you can unmute yourself, or you can enter it in the chat box.
And just a reminder to keep those community agreements that we enter. I'm going to re-enter the community. I'm going to re-enter the community agreements for people who joined later.
Yeah, so Katie Martin here has some great knowledge, and she says, in terms of federal funding that is already provided locally, the process for allocating that happens annually through Everyone Home, which welcomes people directly impacted by these issues on their communities. I participate in this and can share info to anyone interested. Absolutely, Katie. If you want to send us the info, we'll send it out in a follow-up email to everybody. So the question is, someone posed the question about what we feel, what can the federal government do to make affordable housing more accessible to more people? And so I provided some answers, but I wanted to know what you all think about how the federal government can address homelessness and affordable housing in the future, and how they can be a better partner with local agencies or with people doing this work. Lori says supportive services, more permanent affordable housing with supportive services. Oh, someone said a public defender required by law for all eviction proceedings. May is putting it back on the voter with a great response saying, voting for elected officials that also believe housing is a human right. That is a great one. And definitely, we will definitely talk about voter engagement and voter power in a future session. Tammy says, regulate how credit checks affect the approval process in rental applications. A lot of folks get denied because they have an unpaid bill or two. Yes. So thank you for those responses. Keep them coming. I want to talk about, we're going to use the next 20 minutes to continue this large group discussion. So the next question I have, and invite you all to share your thoughts on, reflecting on the info that was presented and also your own insights and knowledge that you already have, is this first question: how has COVID-19 exposed the lack of just long-term affordable solutions?
Yeah, I think posing this question too, I see a lot of folks engaging really actively with the chat, but if you have a good answer for this or just a thought, I've just entered it again into the chat box. How is COVID-19 exposing the lack of those long-term housing solutions? To unmute yourself. We want to hear your thoughts. Because this is something we're all figuring out kind of together.
We want you all to feel welcome to share your thoughts. These are your opinions. There's no wrong answer. We want to support you in what you're thinking.
This is Chris, and I just wanted to say that, I think just the obvious one is they're requiring people to shelter in place, right? It's like the ordinance, and then they're not giving people a place to shelter. So that's just like a clear, lack of that's just not right. So I think that's the easy one hanging out there.
Yeah.
This is Katie Martin, and I completely agree with that. And not only is it just that some people literally don't have shelter at all, but so many people live in very small units with many other people, and yet this is spoken about broadly in terms of, oh, if you just stay at home, then you're not going to infect anybody else. You can stay in a separate bedroom and whatnot. And like that's, I think a lot more people are starting to realize, because of this being, a national, international issue, that many people just don't have the luxury of that. It's exposing the horrible conditions that so many people are forced to live in compared to the upper middle class.
If I could just piggyback off of that, I totally agree with that. For many of our tenants that have issues with paying rent, and so many other tenants that are having problems with paying rent, and the moratorium has been extended. Nonetheless, the issue is what happens after COVID. Landlords are expecting to be paid for the 3 months that they haven't collected their rents or longer. And my concern is that we will have a lot of families that will be evicted as a result of COVID. So that's a huge issue. I think there isn't a balance between the landlords and the city or that's making these determinations to freeze the evictions. Currently, there needs to be a plan or some type of renters assistance put in place for these tenants after COVID. So I just see a large issue with evictions in the next 2 to 3 months that should be addressed now.
Yes, thank you. And in Oakland in particular, and on the county level, where we are pushing government agencies to protect renters and protect people who can't pay their rent right now because of the impacts of COVID. And there is an action next week that I can send to everybody around advocating to the city of Oakland to extend the eviction moratorium. So I can send that information out.
I have a little thought here too on I think it's a really awesome contribution to lack of like the long-term needs that we're seeing right now, because what is going to happen, right? And I think the importance then of I guess it gets messy is my point. Like I've been actually struggling with it myself, thinking about like when we looked at in the presentation, some of the private owners of affordable housing, right? They maybe qualify as landlords, or they look like landlords, but they're they're not, they're our members or whatever, they're the folks who are providing affordable housing. And I think also of, you know, we have a percentage, of course, like most homeowners are white folks, but we have, right, Black homeowners. And I guess just the need to take to focus the long-term assistance on the tenants, but also like we have people who own lands who need like foreclosure and mortgage assistance. And I think it's I don't know, like we work with this idea that renters are the hardest hit and they're the ones who bear the brunt, and the solution should be crafted for them. And then there is these really organized, powerful interest groups who are thinking of their own selves. And I think it's like, it feels like a false divide almost, or at least that's the way the elected leaders are trying to sort through it, is they want to do these protections for renters, and then they're also worried about you know, these other interests. And in general, it's just we need a ton more money going into housing. But I just that was something that your comment sparked for me, and thinking about like that long term approach.
Yeah, we have a lot of great comments in the chat box. Asul is talking about the practices or policies in place, that there aren't enough to ensure landlords can help protect tenants in terms of backed rent, and help landlords understand the situations of tenants, especially for tenants who are really impacted by credit history, and make it harder for folks to get another housing unit if they face eviction when the rent moratorium is lifted. I would love to hear more on that, Asul, if you're open. And then we have Koala saying rent is being paid, or rent is still being paid or having to pay it later when people don't have jobs at the moment because of COVID. It's causing more stress on residents. Yes. May says prioritizing homeowners by allowing for mortgage relief programs, but nothing for renters who inherently have less power and less wealth in our communities. That is absolutely something that's happening, right? There's homeowner protections in place, but we're not seeing the same thing. It's basically protecting people who already have the privilege and the wealth to own a home. John says, this has exposed even more the failure that has already or always existed. The analogy is the hospital gearing up for COVID, trying to get more ICU space, ventilators, etc. But with homelessness, the situation was already emergency room status before COVID. There is no viable system to protect people before COVID. Wow, that's some, yes. Irma says there's not enough funds available to assist tenants with their rent for people who can't pay rent due to being laid off. Absolutely. And Asul added, if unemployment benefits are cut next month, it will be super difficult for folks to get back on their feet or repay, also acknowledging that lots of folks are already deeply suffering because they don't get any public benefits. Yeah. William, it has also exposed the fact that after fighting for funding to end homelessness, COVID showed that funding could be more available when housing is made a priority. Yeah. When it became a health issue, funding was made available, but homelessness has always been a health issue. Absolutely. That is a great point, William. We seen how government agencies were so quick to respond and so quick to say, hey, we have this magic money appearing to solve these issues, but homelessness has been an ongoing issue, and government agencies are pretending like there is nothing else they can do, right? Absolutely. Katie says, the notion that households are unable to pay rent due to layoffs will at any point be able to pay several months of back rent is entirely illogical. Yes, meaning that what Katie is saying is that it's going to be really hard for people who are not paying rent right now to all of a sudden come into this excess amount of money when they're able to go back to work to be able to catch up. We need some kind of debt forgiveness solution at a federal level to compensate landlords. Yes. Or, you know, alternatively, what if banks are like, hey, we're going to attach those 6 months of COVID unpaid rent that you weren't able to collect, we'll attach those to the end of your mortgage. So we're going to extend your mortgage payment deadline by 6 months. So technically, yes, people will be able to, you won't have to be able, basically decommodifying housing for those 6 months, because there was no way for people to be able to earn a living. And let's see, there's a lot. It's hard for me to scroll properly in this chat box. Wait, let me use my mouse.
You're doing amazing, Dolores.
Thanks. And there's already 14 new messages. Okay, so a lot of people saying, good point, William, and good point, May and Irma. Andy says, additional dwelling units were talked about before the COVID-19 crisis as a solution to California's housing crisis. Additional dwelling units, that's often the initials for that are ADU. And what those look like, additional dwelling units, is basically if there's a main house, a property, an additional dwelling unit, it's kind of like a detached housing, or what some people might call an in-law unit. That's what an additional dwelling unit looks like. So that was being talked about as a solution before COVID-19. The messy situation of mortgage and rent forbearance has shown that it is more complicated and harder than many hoped. Do you think ADUs could still be a viable solution to the Bay Area housing crisis? Oh. What do folks think? Do we think that in-law units is still a viable solution, considering that COVID has kind of upheavaled how we think about mortgage and rent forbearance, and that it's actually harder?
So I know I talked for like an hour straight, but I do have a quick gut reaction to this ADU question, which is, yeah, all the solutions, right? Like, like we'd said, and I don't know, I think I've sometimes, because I think we also call ADUs, right, tiny homes. I think they're also
sometimes, yeah.
Some people are like wild about tiny homes, like they like love them and think, I don't know. So I'm a fan, and I wonder if we have somebody who is like on that level of tiny home ADU supporter. I think it was it John who put the comment in the chat, but I would assume, yeah, it's one of those things alongside every other thing. And it's about zoning laws then, you know, to push cities to say, you know, if a single family homeowner with a backyard, they'd like to create an ADU, streamline the process, right? Don't make it so difficult for that homeowner or whoever. It could be a nonprofit entity as well, to create tiny homes, and you know, just getting rid of the regulation. But.
Yeah, and again, I want to reiterate that I think that we should be looking at a ton of different options on how to address the housing crisis right now. EBHO is specifically about affordable housing, and that's what we know. And we are going to advocate for that, but that is not to say that we don't support other types of models, and that other models are any less legitimate. So we, you know, exploring all of the options is important.
Can I say we have a project, 4 units, we're adding 2 AD units to our fourplex. So yes, I am definitely in favor of adding the ADUs. We have 2 ground level units that's wheelchair accessible units. So we were able to fit in 2 studio units that will be set aside for disabled households.
Yeah.
So go for it.
Yeah.
Sorry, that helps too, right? With, oh, never mind. It's I'll message you.
So Lillian put in the chat box that she thinks there should be subsidies for people with empty units to house people at least temporarily during the COVID-19, including renters with extra rooms. It's complicated, but it's one option. So yeah, what do folks think about that? Providing subsidies for people who have available units to be able to house people temporarily. Some folks
I
are
like
saying,
that idea. I think that's a little tricky. We want to make sure we have supportive services if they go down that road. I tried that a few years ago for senior housing. My husband and I, we had 12 houses, and we supplied rooms to low-income seniors. However, we didn't have the supportive services that was needed, and it became a really big issue. A lot of seniors, low-income seniors, they have, medical conditions, mental health, and other types of addictions. It's really important to have supportive services if for affordable housing in general for a lot of families. It's really important.
yeah, thank you. So we're going to go to the next question that we have here, the next prompt, which is how do renter protections, and we've touched on this a little bit already, how do renter protections, preservation policies, etc., relate to the fight to create affordable housing? Do you want to expand on that question, Ronald?
Yeah, so it's a little bit the three-piece piece, and a little bit of a clarifying question, but I guess especially hoping some folks who are on this call looking at Madeline or Lillian, anybody, Tanya, you can't see your screen, but I think you're with us. If you've not lifted your voice into the discussion already, inviting you, to kind of riff off that question, how does that all fit together? Protections and preservation with the creation of affordable housing. It's a little bit like a clarifying question, but it's not a trick question. And I also don't want to put anybody on the spot either. I know I named names, but it's just to invite you in if you'd like.
You're talking about the creation of affordable housing. Were you directing that towards the land trust, the new land trust model? Is that?
Yeah, actually, I think of the land trust model as really is about preserving your home. I mean, could you say a little bit about your own housing situation? Because it is a unique thing that happened over at 12th Ave.
Yeah, and the pandemic has made it the timing was interesting, but we are signing, I think we're finally purchasing the building that I've lived in for 20 years. And I should say the Bay Area Community Land Trust. And it was a big struggle to sort of ensure before the land trust, the idea that we could actually keep it affordable was sort of a miraculous or a fantasy. We did really participate with the old owner to try to write a lease and to lock in some affordable rents. And then the land trust came along and, with a commitment to affordable housing, providing affordable housing. And so it's amazing because this place is such a wreck. It's to talk about, rehab opportunities. We all thought, or we knew it was going to get red tagged and torn down. And this was only, and we would be ass out, as they say. So, it was really amazing to find that there's funding for, or loans provided through Measure KK, I think, in Oakland, that actually was earmarked for specifically saving these rundown buildings and for the tenants that were living in it. So it's really exciting, and it's this is just really seriously the first day. So we're going to see how it goes, but this is really the only way that we would have been able to stay here. We had one a buyer interested who we kind of scared off very gently, who was saying, you know, I'm going to be, don't worry, I won't do any repairs. That was one side of the spectrum. And then, you know, the other side was, oh, well, you know, buyers who would come in and say, well, we'll do all the repairs, but you got to go, you know? So, so this was amazing. And it's a 6-unit place where I think it's like 19 people altogether. So yeah, it's really, it's amazing. And I wish, you know, I hope that there will be more opportunities. I know that there are opportunities to do more of that in Oakland. So
it's work that was possible because of one of the funding mechanisms that the city of Oakland created specifically for preservation of those homes. And it feeds back to some of what we covered in presentation earlier, how we seek to preserve, and the idea is that there are these rundown, it happens because of the ownership model of the past owners who don't do that active maintenance and don't reinvest in the bit and aren't necessarily most focused on providing dignified housing for their tenants. And so it's about like what happens to those buildings. They could be demolished or they could be preserved and rehabbed. And then it's not so much about the building. I mean, I think we love these, whatever. People have different feelings about the building itself. I think it's about the people in the building and what would happen to them otherwise. And that in this case, it's folks that maybe likely would have been displaced who can stay there. So it's a great example, Lillian, I think, of preservation. The question that I posed was, how does that fit preservation with protection, with creation? And creation is something different. I know it's about, it's a lot of the work that I've probably do, but I think something that we'll be exploring and creating more shared understanding around, I think throughout the webinar series, or at least that it's so built into how we try to build power. I think will become more common sense, I think, for other folks. I had entered into the chat a 5-minute warning.
I think it's fine. I think I want to spend a couple more minutes because I really want to get to this next question, which is, if it's government's job to protect our human right to housing, whose job is it to hold leaders accountable? And I will copy and paste this into the chat box. And this is some foreshadowing. Oh, I sent that as a private message. Let me do that again. There it goes. So if it's the government's job to protect our human right to housing, right? And that's the assumption, under the assumption that the government thinks that housing is a human right, whose job is it to hold the government accountable? And Ronald says, full fairness, he did name this earlier. Yes. Kala, John, Skavan. I'm sorry if I need to learn everybody's names. And Lillian are all saying it's the people, it's community, it's residents, it's voters. The humans whose rights are on the line. Tanya says people power.
can I say something?
Yeah.
Okay. I think also maybe consumers, because it's really annoying to me. The Brooklyn Preserve that they're building over there, sort of by Alameda, but it's in Oakland. That's going to be this huge, fancy complex with shopping malls and, and all this. One of the first things that they say in any of their literature is that they're building affordable housing. They have some affordable housing. The same with the plans for the Coliseum, the Oakland Coliseum moving down to Jack London Square. They tout the fact that they're building affordable housing, but it's not affordable. And when I was working with Nita B from the Village, she was saying that over the next 6 years, there's only 250 low-income and no-income units that are slated to be built. But everybody's talking about affordable housing, and that's, people just sort of assume that that's what that that means truly affordable when it really doesn't. So, you know, like holding these big development projects accountable is a little different than holding our elected officials accountable, although, you know, obviously connected. So.
Yes, thank you. And absolutely, this question is foreshadowing, and what you're saying is a great segue into, we are going to delve into that more in these next couple workshops around how we can hold people accountable, deepen our knowledge about what the landscape is now and what work, and also talk about what work EBHO is doing that you all can tie into. And so with that, is there any other thoughts before I move on to the next piece of our session? All right, so I want to talk about what the Learning Lab will look like. And again, this is for the people who are part of the Leadership Academy and then the July session. So the Learning Lab is going to be on Thursday because Friday we have it off for July 4th. So we're going to meet Thursday by Zoom again, and we are going to have even more time to digest what was shared today and to also talk about what we are assigning as homework. So there's a couple different things, and again, we're going to follow up with I'll follow up with an email before the end of today with all this information. So the homework for those of you in the Leadership Academy is there's a comic book on housing history that you will read. It's a very fun read. And then we're also going to ask you to write your own story. So we're going to send an article about identity and then ask you to write what your story is. And then we're going to talk about both of those things as well as digest more of what we discussed today during the Learning Lab next week. And again, the Learning Lab information will be sent just to the Leadership Academy folks. And we want to be able to learn more about each of you, learn about each other, and further unpack today's information. And so for folks who are not able to receive the information by computer because you don't have access to computer, we are going to connect with you and make sure we drop off a no contact COVID, preventing COVID spread, drop off to you so that you have these materials as well. And with that, I want to thank everyone. I especially want to thank Ronald, today's guest presenter. I want to thank all of you for participating and for all the great insight. And we will have this video up so you all can look back at it and send out an email with the next steps and some of this reading. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all July 29th, maybe? The last Friday in July.
Before then, yeah.
Huh? Well, the Leadership Academy folks will see you on Thursday, but everybody else who participated, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next webinar session. Thanks.